especially when I was younger, I had this, I guess, fantasy about create a successful company, become rich, and like be at some point where like everything's fine. Like, I had a destination in mind, not really thinking much about the journey, and realized that and I think I touched on it in a few other lessons here. Like, you really want to be working on something that you enjoy every day and working with people that you enjoy every day. And I think, at least for me, the lesson that I've learned is I enjoyed companies and things that I was working on, even if they ended in failure. Like, I have more of a sense of pride in those things than the things that may have been more successful, but my heart really wasn't in it.
Hey everybody, I'm Blake from Allsmith, and you're watching After the Exit. It's the show where I interview CEOs after they've sold their startup and have them share the lessons that they've learned in blood about business, about relationships, and life. And look, you can learn a couple tips from how they built it, but the real wisdom, the moral of the story, comes at the end, after the exit. Today I'm really excited to introduce you to my new friend, Ade Olonoh. He started his first company as a senior in college, where he'd studied computer science and mathematics at a small school in the Indianapolis area. Prior to starting that company, he'd spent the previous 4 years paying his way through college as a freelance web developer. He's since started 4 companies so far that have exited to varying degrees of success and failure, and a handful of other companies that he quietly shut down before any real traction. The 2 most prominent companies are Formstack, a B2B SaaS company which he bootstrapped for 3 years, then raised $700,000 from angels and sold a major stake to private equity 10 years later, and Formspring, which had insane initial growth, then raised $17 million from VCs and later sold for pennies on the dollar after 4 years. This episode is brought to you by Visible.vc. Raise capital, update investors, and engage your team from a single platform. It's also brought to you by Boilerplate.legal. Did you know that the average startup spends $30,000 in their first 2 years on legal costs? You can save 90% of those costs on venture capital approved legal documents using boilerplate.legal. Well, first off, thanks a ton for doing this. I'm really excited to go through all of these. Obviously I had to read ahead a little bit on your lessons. You got 49 lessons that cover things like, literally you have like starting, money, co-founders, culture, team, investors, product, talking about being a CEO specifically, and then personal lessons. I'm kind of curious, what was the process like for you kind of putting this list together?
Well, first of all, excited to do this. It's a tough process because I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years or so. And so like really thinking back through all that to really, codify all that is kind of tough. And I want to give it an honest shot of like the things that I think one of your prompts was the things that you learned in blood, not just, things that I learned casually. And so I'm trying to think through all the highs and lows and what I learned. So it was kind of a fun journey, but it was tough. So I'm sure I'll change my mind on some of these, as I think about it a few weeks or months later, that feel like there's something that I forgot.
Yeah. What I love is the fact that you've done 4 separate companies, both kind of self-funding, bootstrapped, as well as venture-backed.
Yeah.
And so I think because of that, it really does help. I don't know. I feel like you've got more context than even folks who have one exit, which I think is still a lot of context. But
Right.
Somebody gave me the advice, my exit was not this fantastic outcome. It was a medium.
Sure, yeah.
One of my friends gave me the advice. He said, a medium outcome is probably the best because you can kind of see through what was just luck. If everything went perfectly, you actually get fewer lessons. I think that's even compounded by the fact that you have 4 different instances with different results. So I don't know.
Right.
I think this is going to be very rich.
Yeah, and I should say too. I mean that's just 4 that kind of went to fruition with some sort of exit, varying degrees of success. I mean, a couple of those I got no money out of it, personally. So they were, but then there've been, I think I counted, I've started 8 LLCs or C corps over the course of my career. So like there's some that aren't even worth talking about because like never really like got to be anything, much less get to like a real exit. So anyway.
Really cool. Well, let's jump into it. Your first lesson, You said there is no one path to success. You said contextualize any advice you get. Talk about that and why you started with that.
Yeah, I felt like that was important, especially before getting to the other 48 lessons. Just, to caveat every one of them that, especially when I was younger in my career, I would hear advice and just kind of blindly follow that path. For example, raise money or don't raise money, right? And some people kind of get stuck in, one dogma or the other without really thinking about, what do I want as an entrepreneur? What is, every situation is different in terms of the business of creating the market, et cetera. And so really, people like to, especially on Twitter, where you're limited to 280 characters, people like to compress things into like pithy statements, but you really have to understand and contextualize from whoever you're listening to. Does this apply to me, or when does this apply? And so, yeah, there's no one path. Like like you said at the beginning, I've gone various different ways, and I've seen, the more I've done, the more I've seen that like there are exceptions to every rule that you can kind of put down in terms of business. And, for every one person that's successful following a certain path, there are easily 99 others that, failed that same path. So, yeah.
When you think of a startup founder, what are the big areas that they should be contextualizing against? You mentioned one, which is your desires. Are there other elements that you think they should contextualize against?
Yeah, that's huge. The other is really the type of company you're creating. So, even just simply, are you creating, are you in the B2B space versus B2C? Are you in a space that, are you building something that has the potential to be venture scale versus something that is better, bootstrapped mentality? And so you can't really apply the lessons of VC, of venture to, a company that's, to starting a pizza restaurant or something like that, right? And vice versa. So yeah, all sorts of dimensions too, right?
Great. Your next lesson was be prolific.
Yeah. So, at least in terms of my career, I've started a bunch of different things, and I've realized that probably the times that I was most successful was when I just tried to create a bunch of different things. And I think there is actually a bit of art to entrepreneurship. There's a lot of science to it too, but I like to think of it, as an artist, whether it's a musician or a painter or writer, in every one of those fields, you just have to create a lot of things. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's true too. Most of the successes, even if you think about, great entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg, who, everybody knows the story, created Facebook in college and obviously created a multi-billion generational company. But, at the time, he was building a bunch of different things. And one of my favorite things, it's hard to find on the internet, but there's this video of Zuck talking pretty early on about Facebook. And he was actually more excited about this other idea, Wirehog, and was kind of downplaying like Facebook. He was like, he'll get into a few colleges, but it wasn't this grandiose, like all my eggs in one basket. He was just building a bunch of different stuff and then seeing what hit. And I think that story is a lot more prevalent than it seems. At least it seemed to me at first. It seemed to me that all the great entrepreneurs I was following just found something, hit it out of the park on their first swing. And I think it's important to, if you're thinking about your journey as an entrepreneur, to just get ready for your first idea might suck, it might fail. And so just keep doing it. An artist doesn't, paint one picture and then if it sucks, then they quit and, go get a job, at a graphic design firm, right? So they just keep painting, and that's what you need to do.
You said it's better to regret something you have done than regret something you haven't.
Yeah. And, I think specifically this applies to entrepreneurship. I don't know how much I would take that to other areas of your life, but, for me, there's a period between businesses where I've only had one job as an adult, where, it wasn't a company that I created. And I took that because frankly, after my first startup, I was broke and needed money, and felt like a failure and felt like, all right, I just need to go get a job. And I stayed in that job much longer than I really wanted to. I knew that I wanted to go back and create something new, but it really took a lot for me to kind of take that risk and make the leap again. And I think, at least for me, and I see this in a lot of entrepreneurs, it's a lot less risky in the long run than it feels. And I think, like, for me, like, fortunately it worked out, but I got to a point where I knew that I would have regretted not taking the leap and starting something, versus doing it and it failing.
That's important what you said. Why is it a lot less risky than people think it is?
Yeah, because I think it feels, at least it felt to me, like if I take this leap and fail, I'll be out of a job. I'll be, what will people say? What will people think about me? How will I feed my family? But we're fortunate, at least in the ecosystem that exists right now, that there really is a path towards going through multiple failures and still finding success along the way. It's not a one and done thing. It goes back to kind of the prolific conversation where every time I failed, it felt like, okay, my career's over, it's done. And now with some hindsight, I can see, pick whatever cliche you want, doors closed and window open, or whatever, that, like, I learned things along the way that helps continue to build my career. And I've seen that in other people too, people who 10, 20 years ago stumbled and then they're back doing amazing things over time, because life is long. And so it's not as risky if you think about it across a longer time frame. I think we tend to think about things in kind of the short time frame of what's happening now, rather than thinking about it in the context of a career.
Next, you said it's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, and this is one for me that a couple thoughts here. One is, especially when I was younger, I had this, I guess, fantasy about create a successful company, become rich, and like be at some point where like everything's fine. Like, I had a destination in mind, not really thinking much about the journey, and realized that and I think I touched on it in a few other lessons here. Like, you really want to be working on something that you enjoy every day, and working with people that you enjoy every day. And I think, at least for me, the lesson that I've learned is I enjoyed companies and things that I was working on, even if they ended in failure. Like, I have more of a sense of pride in those things than the things that may have been more successful, but my heart really wasn't in it, or like I wasn't working on those things with like the people that I wanted to work on. And those things have been few and far between, but because I think I learned that lesson not pretty early. But I think it's important to, as you think about what company to work on, who you work with, do you go to the venture route versus the bootstrap route? Do you work in this market versus this other market? Think about the journey and think about, is this something that I want to be working on next year or the year after? And will I enjoy this endeavor, whether or not the destination is one that, is successful, right? And so, yeah.
That's great. You said, in order to enjoy the journey, you have to be a missionary, not a mercenary. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and that's very similar to the previous point, I guess. There's a lot of overlap. I forget who first coined the missionary mercenary concept as it applied to startups. But I read a great post from somebody about this early, and it really clicked in that being a missionary means you just really, you care about the vision and the mission of the company that you're trying to create. And that's your primary motivator, versus a mercenary is really looking at, I guess, this, the spreadsheet angle of it, in that, if we execute this, and this, then this leads to this sort of exit and this multiple. And, this is how much cash I'm going to walk away from this endeavor with. And I think that's probably the most important step, is even before you start, like, are you excited about this idea and this opportunity because, you care about the customers and the problem you're solving and all those things? Or are you excited about it because, and it's hard sometimes, at least for me, to be like truly honest about myself. Like, am I excited about this because it's a hot space and I see a lot of activity here and I know it'll be easy to raise money? And is that why I'm getting excited? So, yeah.
Yeah, I found the tricky part for me is I found that I can be pretty good at self-deception, and I can inject meaning kind of into anything, but that only lasts so long.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. And that's, I think that's the point of kind of the last two things. It's like, really, this is much more process of self-discovery and understanding, and like doing some like deep work to understand your own psychology, and like, to really understand, like, are you deceiving yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit. Those were kind of some general lessons. Now we're going to shift over onto specifically starting, which I think there's so many questions. If you look at Google searches around startups, these are the areas that I think most people have questions about. So you started with, you said, don't worry about scaling until you actually have scale. Mm-hmm. I love this. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'd say, this is a lesson learned in blood, kind of both ways. I mean, I've definitely had things where I just got stuck too much in the starting standpoint. And because I was thinking about, it was, Paul Graham's famous, line is, do things that don't scale, but, it was just stuck in the, how is this going to work when it's at, a few hundred customers or thousands or whatever, and just waited too long, and kind of talked myself even out of ideas that I think, in hindsight, I wonder, what if I would have just approached that in more, more organic, iterative way? And then kind of the other side of it, I started a company, Formspring, that went from 0 to 1 million users in 45 days. And, literally it was like, up all hours of the night, like just frantically adding servers to clusters because the software hadn't scaled. And on the other side of that, I'm glad I did it that way, because basically built the app in just a few weeks, and didn't build out kind of the infrastructure to support that sort of growth, and couldn't have imagined in my wildest fantasies that would happen so quickly. But it helped me get it out there at the right time. And I don't, it was painful to go through that, but that is extremely rare. And even on the other side of it, I wouldn't change a thing about how I did that. So yeah.
You were fine. You survived.
I survived. Yeah.
That's good. You said solve a problem you understand well. You said best case is building something that you'd personally use every day.
Yeah. And so, eating your own dog food is, I think, a very important thing. Like I've just seen, I've been more successful where I'm trying to solve a problem that I have. And that's a great shortcut towards really understanding the customer well. Now, it can get dangerous where, if you're only building for yourself and not able to really generalize that to a larger audience, that could be dangerous and tricky. But it's a better shortcut. It's been a better shortcut for me versus I've stumbled often where I've said, I don't really need this, but I think somebody else would need this, and this person looks like that. And even finding those people to talk to and do, great customer development is harder, and really understanding them well. It just takes a lot more work. And I think I've just seen in others as well. In general, that tends to lean towards more mercenary startups where you're solving something that's so distant from yourself, versus missionary where you're this needs to exist in the world. And I know that, viscerally.
Yeah. And also it makes you faster because
Yeah.
you usually don't have to do customer interviews every day, right? You
Right.
can just ask yourself, like, I just need this thing to exist.
Or even if you add,
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Or even if you are doing customer interviews every day, you know the right questions to ask. It's a lot more effective than if you're going into a field that you know very little about.
Yes. Next, you said charge more than you think you should.
Yeah. Especially early on, I made the mistake of just undercutting myself. The reality is, as and maybe a little bit of, I guess countering the previous statement, like as a customer, I built things and said, well, I'd love to get this for free. I'd pay $5 a month for it. And in reality, being a broke software developer entrepreneur, like I probably wasn't I really understood the problem well, but I probably wasn't the ideal customer. And so I just needed to charge more to create a healthy business that allowed me to, scale more and grow. So yeah.
Are you a pretty agreeable person?
It probably in general, it probably depends on what it is. Yeah.
Sure. But I guess it does, I've found a pattern that I think that at its base, capitalism is you create something of value and then you refuse to give it to people unless someone gives you money. So
right.
It's actually, you have to kind of withhold in order to trade something.
Yeah.
And I'm a very agreeable person. And so I often don't like the feeling of saying, I won't give this unless you give me X, right? And so I tend to negotiate against myself because I like it when people feel good about me. And essentially it's like, that's worth monetary value to me, apparently, at some subconscious level.
Right. No, that's great insight. And it's also hard, especially if it's something, if you have a missionary mindset and this needs to exist in the world. And I see that you have the problem as well. And I want to solve the problem for you. And I want to help you. And if you can only afford, $5 a month instead of $50 a month, then sure, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. We often talk ourselves into, very low, at least in kind of, the SMB SaaS world, of pretty low pricing. And then, I challenge you to look at our typical customer, look at what they actually spend money on and how much they spend. And it's they're paying, $100 a month just for their, Verizon bill or something, or $200 a month, for their, Comcast bill. And so why wouldn't they spend that much with this purpose-built software? So anyway.
Yes. You said build something that's 10 times better than the status quo.
Yeah. I think I've personally gotten to, stuck too much in iterating and getting enamored by ideas. I have this problem, there's this app or solution that already exists. And if only it had this feature and this feature, then it would be better. And the reality is that's just really hard to sell. I mean, there's a path to making that successful, but in general, you really need to, in the technology space, leapfrog, the existing solutions. And probably, a better metaphor is really find a different, completely different way, non-intuitive way to solve the same problem than the way other people are solving it, today. And so, I think I've been best served trying to challenge myself to that bar of 10x rather than iterating.
Start bottoms up, not top down. Utility plus novelty is greater than thesis. Now, I'm not sure where is the parentheses on that math equation?
Parentheses around utility plus novelty. So what I mean by this, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about, especially lately. I've noticed as I've gotten older, and especially, I think the more I know, the more it's easier for me to go to start with Thesis. And by that, what I mean is looking at kind of the world and saying, things like broad theses like the future of work, or the decentralization of media, or things that you read 2,000 word posts on from great thinkers and VCs and strategists talking about how the shape of the world, the shape of the technology industry is changing, the consumerization of the enterprise, what's mobile, and that's a very top-down thinking. And I think especially, and I have my foot in the VC world right now, and I think that's a great thing for VCs to think about, because as a VC, you're always thinking about what you want to find, invest in a great team working in a space that's small today, but it's going to be a huge market, tomorrow. And so you're thinking about those themes and those theses. But as an entrepreneur, what happens too often is or at least, the mistake I've made is if you start that way, then you start with start with ideas that really are way too broad, and you get away from just building things that the utility that just solves a problem, and the novelty of it, it's just cool and different. And the reality is the best companies and the biggest companies, I think, do a little bit of both. And I think what I'm trying to understand in general, but my hypothesis is that entrepreneurs probably most often stumble into the thesis, or maybe it's a small, part, kind of thing in the back of their head. I mean, back to the Zuckerberg example, it wasn't that he was thinking about whatever Facebook's mission is today, right? That wasn't at the tip of his tongue back then. He was just this is cool. This is a way to see pictures of girls on canvas, right? And there was utility, there was some novelty to it, and you kind of look at all sorts of, whether it's even in the B2B space, Dropbox. Drew Houston was just I forgot my USB drive. I need a way to get files when I go from here to there without bringing a USB drive. Wasn't really thinking about the decentralization of or wasn't thinking about the cloud or the future of work and these big theses. He was just build something to do something. And so I think in general, the startup world, I feel like most entrepreneurs get pulled into because we're coached by VCs in terms of how to pitch and how to talk about our business and think about our business. I think that shapes sometimes the types of companies that are created, and I think we've gotten away for the most part. And again, this is a mistake that I've made, especially more recently. I think you need to start building cool things and that solve a very specific narrow problem, and then figure out later, is this going to be $1 billion company?
Yeah. If you look at even the Myers-Briggs, what you're describing is sensing versus induction. Right. Or no, not induction. What is it?
Intuitive.
Intuitive. Yes. Sensitive versus intuitive. And intuitive is top-down thinking. And you would think that all the greatest business leaders would be intuitive. If you actually look at it, most of them are sensing, which means that they learn from doing and from touching. And it's oh, this seems to be resonating with this person. And I think that the best leaders probably have an ability to then climb up the ladder and justify it with a thesis, or maybe even find a thesis that matches it. But I think it starts on a very tangible, kind of almost trade level interaction with your product, as opposed to thinking philosophically or strategizing in an ivory tower with a whiteboard,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. You said next, build vision from within.
Yeah, and this is somewhat related, but I think ultimately, I'm just I'm fascinated by technology in general and business in general, and so there are a lot of ideas that I see, and it's that's super cool, and that's really exciting, and I think this kind of connects a few of those points where again, I've probably been more successful when it's something that came from within and experience and came from my own first principles versus really looked at worst thing to do would be to look at the list of what's Y Combinator's annual like 50, call for startups or whatever. Like look at that list and say, okay, that sounds cool. I want to build that, right?
But so many ventures. It seems like venture studios are doing that. Do you think that's a problem, or do you think that I guess maybe it depends on how they're reaching out to entrepreneurs? I don't know. What do you think? Because I do feel like a lot of times venture studios start in that place. Yeah.
That's that's a tough question. I have friends at venture studios, and we've had these conversations. I'm skeptical about venture studios for that reason, and I think there are ways that can get around that for sure. I think magic probably happens when they find an entrepreneur who has that vision and to lead it, but uses the studio as a way to support it, rather than people at the studio coming up with an idea and then like searching for somebody who can kind of get them on board and find passion in that. Not that it can't be successful that way, but at least the lesson I've learned, like to have the energy and stamina and to build a long-lasting business, like it's better if like, no, this is what I wanted to create, and like I'm excited about it because of first principles.
Yes. All right, now we're getting into some money lessons. I'm excited about these. To build wealth, you need to make money while you sleep.
Yeah, and that's just something I started out in doing freelance work even before I started a company. And one of the companies I created was we did contract software development, and I moved into building products because I guess it's most people, it's one of those lessons that I don't think gets talked about enough, and I think it's just very foundational. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs understand that. I think it's kind of the rich dad, poor dad sort of thing. But I just had to learn it kind of the hard way. That that most people, not everyone, but most people that have built wealth have done it by figuring out how to create an asset that makes them money while they sleep. And obviously, once you get enough money, then that money can be the asset that makes money while you sleep. And so there's another way to do that without, or I guess to get to that level. But I just had to learn as an entrepreneur. Like if I wanted to build wealth for myself and my family, I came from pretty poor background. Like I had to learn that I need to think about how to build this machine that makes money rather than be trading my time for dollars.
Yes. It is incredible that we, just from an opportunity standpoint, we have at our fingertips primarily free software to create things.
Right.
For incredibly cheap that will make money forever. Like it's such an amazing, unprecedented opportunity for us to do that. And I think people maybe underestimate the satisfaction of a $30 Stripe payment that came in literally while you were sleeping. And when you wake up and see oh my gosh, it feels like cheating. Like it's like, I can't believe I got paid and I didn't directly do a thing. Forget all the hours you put in to build the machine. It's it's addicting.
Yeah, I'll never forget the first customer for Formstack happened like that, where I was like, I had no idea who this was. Like I didn't talk to her ahead of time. Like she just signed up and put in her credit card, and it just happened. And it was just it was only $5, but it felt magical. It was incredible. And like I said, it's I think it's a pretty basic lesson, but unfortunately, I think just society, we still talk about coach people when they're young, that think about getting a good job rather than thinking about side hustles or ways that you can make money when you sleep.
Yes. Yeah. Next, you said be frugal.
Yeah, this is one that's I started out pretty frugal. One that's been hard to stick with, but from
a personal standpoint, from a business standpoint,
from a business standpoint, I think it's. I think I generally have done that better, from a personal standpoint. But I think, it's, especially as you grow as a company, it's easy to convince yourself you need a nice office because you need to really impress, potential employees, potential customers. It's really easy to think things like, I need to spend a bunch of money with a design firm to get like just a killer logo and brand identity and all that stuff. And, that's where, and there's a balance to it. You don't want to be frugal to the point where you're not investing in, the growth of the business. But in general, like if there's one side or the other to err on, being frugal is it. And, I think I was, floored reading, it's been a while back, but like reading one of the books about Amazon and just like the frugality of, not buying desks and, using old doors and cinder blocks, at the point when they were, I think it was even, well into the life and growth of the company. And, even today they're extremely frugal, but that just serves you well and gives you a lot of optionality. And I think, I certainly haven't, I certainly didn't do that, early on when I probably should have. And so, yeah, I don't, that gives you a lot more. And I think I get into this. I guess it's in a couple.
Yeah, your next one is the scarcity brings clarity. Yeah, talk about that, like the added benefit to that.
Right. And so, when you force that constraint upon yourself, one of the other areas where for me it's been hard to be frugal is, especially if things are going well, if things are going really well or things are going poorly, one of the instincts is to let's throw more bodies at it. Like we need to hire more people and fix the problem. We need more engineers or we need more, SDRs or, whatever it is. And those constraints, I've found often that it brings a lot more clarity and towards like, if you can't hire anybody, if you can't spend any more money on marketing, then you have to, then the only leverage you can pull is really understanding well what's happening in your business and understanding, oh, well, this marketing spend is highly inefficient. So we need to cut this and shift from this to this, or, this way that we're selling is really, inefficient and not working. Or we're building too much product. I don't need more engineers. I need to cut some features and really streamline the product to be able to sell better or grow faster. And that clarity, that clarity can be game changing.
Yes. I'm currently bootstrapping a startup, and my previous company was venture backed. And I'm blown away at, it's almost like when you're venture backed and you have a decent amount of cash in the bank, it's like you have a million paths ahead of you. And you spend so much of your time questioning, am I on the right path?
Right.
But right now, bootstrapping, I know what I need to do every morning. Because it's really clear. It's like, oh, will this make us more money? And it's like, great, just chase that. And there's something about that I'm finding, I don't know, it's like a relief. I really do like that experience.
It really, it really helps you focus on what's the most efficient way to spend this dollar versus, I'm a VC. Like I've started businesses backed by VC and thought it was a good option. But I think one of the worst thing that happens is kind of like our current, raise this huge bucket of money. Like, we get numb to it in terms of like, oh, you only raised, $1 million in your seed instead of 4 million. We're like, it's $1 million, right? Like raise $1 million and then, you're coached that, that should give you 12 to 18 months of runway. And so that creates this, you start out with a math of like, okay, I should be spending, this amount every month. And like, if I'm not, then I'm off track. And like, that's a backwards way of looking at it. Right. So,
That's great. Last one, you said, don't run out of money. That's your number one job.
Yeah. And I think, Fred Wilson wrote a post on this that think is great. And if I remember correctly, it was some form of like, that's actually your number one, number two, number three job is like, don't run out of money as CEO. And yeah, especially in kind of a venture setting, it's easy to forget that and just think, oh, well, I'll be able to raise money the next time, or, things are going to be working well. And so, we'll be able to, but, all comes down to, as a CEO, you need to figure out like, how do I create an engine that turns $1 into $1.10 or $2 and create that, create that engine. And so the company doesn't run out of money. And, profitable business is just like a beautiful thing where it's like, really, this will last forever unless, unless, something major happens. So anyway.
Great. Okay, now we're getting into some co-founder conversations. I see a lot of mistakes, and I've made a lot of mistakes in this area. So first one you said is you may not need a co-founder. A bad co-founder is worse than no co-founder.
Yeah, and this is one where it's tough. Like that's a good example where some people preach like you need a co-founder, and I think that's a good one to take, contextualize that advice. And I think like I've gotten in situations where I felt like needing a co-founder was more important than finding the right co-founder. In situations where like it clearly wasn't a fit and there were red flags from the beginning, but I felt like I was failing by not having a co-founder. And so I just coach people to think about, do you actually need one? Like why? And, at the very least, like make sure you're not, you're not just checking a box, that you're actually doing the deep work to figure out if this is a good fit.
Yes. Yeah. Even that probably relates to the next, is that if you don't see each other as equals, make sure everyone recognizes that early.
Right. And that's one where, at least the situations that I've got into, the first company I created was out of college, and it was just funny how many mistakes I made in that process. But it was like I had a group of really great friends, and it was like, hey, I want to start this thing. Do you guys want to come with me? And so they did, and then they were all computer science grads as I was. And then there were four of us, and the four of us were sitting around and we're like, we know very little bit about business. We should find a business guy too, or being a business person to join. And so then there were five of us, and it was just like, kind of this process of just piling people on. And we were like, how do we split equity? I don't know. Let's just split it all equally. And then, pretty, I guess, too late in the process, but early on into the life of the company, you realize like, we didn't see each other as equals in terms of what we were all bringing to the business. And, some people really just wanted a job more than they wanted to be a co-founder or an owner in the business. And, I will tell the whole story, but, one person actually did that. It was like, hey, I just run the business. I'll just be an employee. And then two ended up leaving, and it was pretty messy. But yeah, I think at least in my experience that like, do you respect each other in terms of what you're bringing to the table? When I think about, my marriage, like we respect each other, and we feel like we're equals. We don't feel like, well, I'm the one that's, bringing in more money, or I'm the one like, helping more with the kids. And so like, and I feel like you have to get to that point in a business where you feel like I couldn't do it without you, and you couldn't do it without me. And we respect each other, have that mutual respect, not that, well, you've had all this experience and like, I'm just the code monkey, and, or, vice versa. Like I'm the one creating the product and you're just out, selling. And so, you have to have mutual respect and see each other's equals.
Yes. There's so much wisdom in this. Okay. So next you said talk early and often about expectations and frustrations, and embrace difficult conversations. Talk about that skill. How were you at the beginning, and how did that develop over time?
Yeah, well, your question about it, are you agreeable? It's pretty prescient. Yeah, like I think even the example I just described in my first company, we were friends, and which made it harder. So like there were some difficult conversations that we definitely avoided, in that situation. Like I remember that meeting where we were talking about equity, like it was just like silence until, everyone was like, somebody was like, well, let's just split it. And then we're like, okay, fine. Because like nobody wanted to disagree. I think if I had to do not just that situation, but other situations over again, I would try to think about the hardest questions to ask a friend. Like things like, and I coach other entrepreneurs, like, hey, if TechCrunch is doing a profile or whatever, pick whatever magazine, and like they're going to put a picture on the cover, but it's only one of you. Whose picture would it be on the cover? If you get invited to speak, and do a TED talk about your company, like who's going to do that TED talk? Like, and are you fine with that, right? And then are you fine with it if like, do we both go on VC pitches? And if we go out for drinks with the VCs afterwards, and talk about like, are we both going to do it? Like, are we both going to quit our jobs? And like be willing to live on ramen noodles for 24 months to make this work. And so like all those difficult conversations, like it's really hard, at least for me, like especially with friends, like to be like, what happens here? How do we fire each other? What does that look like? If it doesn't work out. And so, yeah,
it's really important to have these conversations up front, and even to have those legally structured too. Okay, you said once you give away equity, it's hard to take it back. I'm assuming that's reinforcing your point number one, talking about co-founders as well.
It's all of them, and even just mechanically, like I think now it's probably a little much better understood, like have a vesting schedule, like and it feels scary. The first time that an investor was like, you have to, you should go on a vesting schedule, and it's like, oh, is this some trick for VCs to take equity away from me? And then it's like, it's I guess like that feeling even between co-founders of like signing a prenup before you get married. It's like, why do you want to sign a prenup? Like, because you don't trust me, and you're already thinking about leaving, so you want to put me on a vesting schedule so that I work 11 months and then you fire me. But the reality is like, once you give away equity and just like make a casual decision to be like, yeah, you get 50%, I get 50%. Like, it's really, really hard to take it back. Like that's what the Facebook movie was all about. Like, the lawsuit to try to get that equity back, because like, that was just kind of flippant, like, oh yeah, you get 10% or whatever it was, the company. And it's that was a lesson learned.
Yes, yet to see anybody give it back willingly.
Right. I mean, and by the way, that's true for VCs, investors as well. Like, it's there's a way to get divorced, but once you're married to your co-founders and your investors, like they're on that cap table, for the life of the company. So
great. All right, let's shift over to some culture conversations. You said figure out your core values early before you hire or fire anyone. Is that you personally, you the business, both? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, you the business, but I guess both. Like, I think, the best way I can probably talk about that is like, I think there's a lot of, misunderstanding about culture. And, we talk about wanting to have a good culture, or like hire people that are a good culture fit. And usually what people mean when they say those things is really like, I want a fun place to work, and I want people that, I can share a beer with, right? But I think it's really important to do kind of the hard work of understanding, what kind of company, what do I value in terms of like how people work, and how we execute against the mission. And so probably the best example is like, Facebook's move faster, break things, like, great. We all nod and like great, best, great company. But then you look at Apple, And, I don't know how they talk about this internally, but, they move very slowly, but make things perfect. And like, we all love Apple as well. And that's an amazing company. And so those things are at odds with each other, but neither is wrong. You have to figure out like, what is the way that you think, that you personally, how you want to work and what you think will work best for the company. And so before you hire anybody, even like being able to codify that so you understand the language of like, when you say this person's a culture fit, it's not just like, can I, do I want to have a beer with them? It's, this person really embodies the core values of how I think our company should operate.
Yeah, that's really good. And you said, so don't crowdsource those values.
Yeah. I think it's really important to, I think even the process is, it involves a lot of work, really understanding you and like how you, what are your, how do you operate? Are you a move fast and break things person, or are you a person who like gets stressed and frustrated if, if your engineering team is just constantly breaking things like, and so really understand like what you want rather than like looking at a company you admire or, and crowdsourcing those and saying like, because the reality is like most people's core values like sound really good. Like, and I think, even Enron had like integrity as one of their core values. And, we're all like, yeah, of course, integrity, hardworking, work-life balance, or like whatever, the cliche stuff, but you have to really like figure out like what makes you different. How's your company going to be different and unique? And like, what are the, where are you comfortable on the extremes of spectrums, in terms of like, is it integrity to the point where, like you're going to fire somebody because they like, I don't know, didn't refill the coffee pot or something, what, and so you have to figure out what those things are that really matter to you and to the company that you're creating.
Yeah, I almost feel like we need a different word than values.
Yeah.
It's almost like we need a word like preferences. Like, what are the things that this company prefers?
Yeah, actually,
or default?
one of the things I've played with, so HP created their kind of core values, and I think this was pretty on, and called it the HP way. And I really love that because it really like hits on kind of what I was talking about in terms of like what makes your company different. And, the way they talk about it internally, if I understood correctly, is like, this person does things the HP way, or this person doesn't do things the HP way. And like, this is the HP way to do things. And that really like, it kind of illuminates, oh, this is different than culture or values. Like we all value integrity, but it's maybe not like the HP way to.
Yes, it's not uniquely. It's not uniquely your way. Yes, that's good.
Right.
Okay, we're falling a little bit behind on time. If we're going to get through these in our allotted time, so let's do a little bit of a blitz as we go through team learnings. And so we're going to go through them, just kind of knock them out as you go. So number one, you said, don't shortcut just because you need someone urgently. Yeah,
I think that the biggest mistakes I've made in hiring is because I felt a sense of urgency. I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yes. Hire fast, fire fast.
Yeah. I also think, a bit of conflict with the previous one, but I think in general, like if you press, the reality is we all have to hire fast. I mean, we're getting, you're choosing people to spend, most of your day with after like, seeing a resume and talking to them for like 2 or 3 hours in totality. So like the hiring process is pretty fast anyway. So I guess, in terms of time spent with them, it's short. Figure out how to compress that. I think you hire the best people if you're able to move fast, and that can be your competitive advantage rather than taking a long time to make a decision. I think if you press yourself to hire fast, then that kind of forces you to build the foundation of really understanding, like what are our core values? So how can I identify that somebody is, going to do things the, XYZ way? Like that's a lot of hard work before the hiring process. Figuring out the interview process, what questions you're going to ask, how you're going to evaluate. Like you have to do a lot of prep work to be able to hire fast. and then fired fast. I mean, just most people that didn't work out, it took way too long for me to get to that point of saying like, I don't think it's a fit. And I don't think I've ever, I think every situation I felt like, I don't think it's going to work out. And then there was a long period of time between that realization and me making the right steps. And I don't think I've ever told myself, I don't think it's going to work out. And it ended up actually working out. So
you don't think about firing great employees.
Right.
Yeah. Sell first, vet second.
Yeah, I think I've found more success in hiring when I first go to it with a mentality of I'm trying to sell you on the company and the opportunity, rather than trying to figure out, are you a great person or not? Which I think is also the wrong way to think about it. It's really more about like, is it a great fit? But anyway, yeah, I think for me, selling first in the interview is the best approach.
Yeah, we did that. We actually separated those roles. So with technical people, I was always the first one, and I'm non-technical. And so essentially, they had to have certain qualifications just to get an interview. But then at that point, it was pretty much a pitch meeting and me just building rapport. And if I still liked them after that, and they still were interested after that, then I passed them on for vetting with someone who could actually ask those hard questions.
Yeah, but I'd argue, I mean, you're even, if you think at the top of the funnel, you're selling, your company and your brand and all that before they even apply, right? And so you have to think about that too in terms of, and this especially applies to like at scale and like when you're trying to hire, a lot of people. But
smart, passionate, culture fit before skills and domain expertise.
Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory, and that like more, especially early on, more generalists versus specialists. And I think I have made the mistake too often of like, I need somebody who is really good at coding in this language or has experience with this technology, and or has become too enamored with like somebody like this company in our space that's like the 800 pound gorilla in the space, and like they worked there, and so like they'd be a great fit here versus like just finding like smart people who are passionate about doing what they do with you, and then fit the culture. I think much better investment.
Yes. I listened to a couple podcasts that you had done earlier, and you had mentioned something like this before, and it actually caused me to do a retrospective on a couple different hires that I'd made. And I've made that mistake explicitly. Like I wanted somebody who'd solved exactly our problem before, and that's what I filtered for instead of, and he didn't work out, and that's why. Sure. Great. As you grow, find great VPs that can help you scale up.
Yeah, and I probably need to tighten up that lesson a little bit. Like what's the specificity here, but hiring executives is really, really hard because in general, especially me, like I didn't know what they look like in terms of like how to hire for that, and especially like hiring people who've been there when I was inexperienced, in relation to them. It's like, how do I even, it's, I guess, the equivalent of like, how do you hire the PhD when you have, just the high school level, like, understanding of that field, right? And so like finding a great, VP of engineering or VP of marketing or whatever is really tough. But I think, probably you don't want to do it. Like the timing is tricky, but if you find the great person at the right time, like they really make a huge difference in terms of how you can scale your company.
You said don't take it personally when people want to move on. Embrace their tour of duty. Did you read The Alliance by Reid Hoffman?
I think that's where that came from. Yeah, I was trying to remember where. Yeah, so yes, it's especially early on in my career, like I'm passionate about the company, and like I felt like I put a lot of work investing in an employee, and hiring them, and then to have the meeting, you got a minute, on a Friday afternoon, and a couple of years into kind of their time there, and it's like, why are you leaving? And so I took that personally, I think, too much early on. But I think it's just a lot healthier to think about, like, the reality is, there's some people that have spent the majority of their career at some Formstack in particular, and that's awesome. But most people like are looking for the next challenge, and the reality is, like, most startups, like, you're not scaling fast enough to provide those those challenges or diversity of opportunities and things to work on. And so really look at, like, how can you align for that year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, that they're going to spend at the company, and, like, embrace it, that, like, they're going to move on and do, potentially bigger and better things. And, like, don't be offended by that. Like, it's better to, like, preserve those relationships, and, may pay off down the road in terms of, like, finding a way to work together again, or it may not. So.
Yep. My current CTO was my CTO in my last company, and actually left early because his life was kind of taking a different turn, and was very amicable. And sure enough, now we're working together again.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We're going to test to that. All right, we're getting on to some investors. Take money from people you want to work with, no matter the valuation.
Yeah. So, one of the companies, like, I signed a term sheet that was half the valuation of another term sheet, just because I wanted to work with, the people behind it, and didn't regret it. Like, I think that's, that's, like, to some of the previous points.
Yeah. The inverse is also true, which is if
Right.
just because someone gives you a good valuation doesn't mean you should work with them. You should take their money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's what it's like. I turned down the higher term sheet because, I guess it was a little bit of both, wanting to work with people versus not wanting to work with a different syndicate. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said earlier, they're on the cap table forever, or as long as the company is around. So, like, you really have to think hard about who you're working with.
Great. Next, hire a Silicon Valley-esque attorney to do your VC round.
Yeah. And I had to ask in there because I think, like, especially now, there are probably more attorneys around the country who, understand VC term sheets and docs. But, short story is, paid way too much money to an attorney who, in hindsight, never really did work on a VC round before. He said he had, I'm sure worked on other, like, rounds that may have looked like that, but probably more like, real estate or private equity or something like that. And also made some big mistakes that, cost money. So, just do it, do your legal work with people who, like, are doing these things every day. Like, it's important.
Yes. Don't take money from an angel who's making their first investment.
Yeah.
Someone has
to, and I think, I don't want to, like, this is one that, like, you have to take it with a grain of salt and, like, really understand, like, okay, what's the context in which, obviously, if, like, you're taking money from, a family member, like, that's probably different in terms of, whether or not you want to take money from them, especially, like, getting the company off the ground. But the reality is, like, I think it's better to work with people who, with angels who are doing this, like, all the time. Like, I think, or at least have done it a bunch before. And I just, in general, the angels who, it was the kind of the first investment, or, like, wasn't something they were doing a lot, they had more of a mindset of looking at their investment the same way they do, invest in stocks, which is they call me up and say, like, how's my investment doing? Is it up or down? And they get angry when it's down, and, they're happy when it's up. Versus the professional angels that I worked with call me up and say, like, how can I help? What can I do to help my investment be successful? And I think that's, you want to find people who are really the latter.
That's good. Bootstrap first and for longer than you think you should.
Yeah. I mean, that goes to some of the frugality stuff, but I just think in general, like I've personally made way more money from cases where like I bootstrapped for a long period of time before raising money. And like the reality is like you get to the more traction, you can show before you raise money, like it increases the opportunity of like the good investors to work with, like better terms, just better situation all around. And I think the reality is probably too often as entrepreneurs, because it feels like there's so much easy money out there, we start with, if you're starting something today, you probably are starting with like, let me go raise money. Let me work on my pitch deck before I work on my business. And, I think that's backwards. So even as a VC, like I think, try to figure out how you can demonstrate something before you go raise money. It'll be better for you as an entrepreneur.
Yep. And that leads to traction solves everything.
Yeah. I mean, I just, I've definitely had cases where like, I ran a process, tried to raise money. It didn't happen. That's happened several times. And then I've had, probably the other extreme where I went to raise money and like did it really quickly. And the biggest differentiation is traction. I mean, really briefly, like I think the three types of traction that matter in terms of raising money. Like one is personal traction. Like if you're somebody who had $1 billion exit, like you're gonna raise however much money you want on a napkin, like that's fine. Most of us are not that. Second is like technical traction. Did you like, invent something that's, game changer, breakthrough? Like most of us, we're also not doing that. Like we're creating, software, and it's not, rocket science. And so like, it really comes down to like, what's the customer traction? And for me, that's been the difference between like raising a round and, I think the quickest I've done it was like 10 days from intro to term sheet to signed term sheet. And then, the longest is, infinity, where like it never happened. Right. And like the difference was, traction.
That's really good. Why don't you read them? Your 7 product laws.
All right. 1, release early and often. 2, talk to users every day. Answer as many support requests as possible. 3, measure everything. 4, find out the one metric that matters. 5, understand user psychology really, really well. 6, revisit onboarding frequently. Spend an incredible amount of time on it. And then 7, stay true to your vision, your DNA. Don't be afraid to carry a big stick.
Can you modify at least the last one? I was curious what you meant by carry a big stick.
I think, especially as like a founder and CEO, like I think it's important to, and this is like specific to a few instances that I had personally where the company, and in hindsight, we were straying from the vision and like the DNA of the company and like what we were trying to do. And I think needed to be more authoritarian in those instances rather than collaborative and say, we're off track. We need to get back on track. So, and that's rare that needs to happen probably, but I need to do that a couple times.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is that if you don't do that, it's almost like if you do kind of go along with what anybody else is saying, subconsciously you'll end up sabotaging it.
Right.
And so it's almost better to go with your conviction, even if it's a bad conviction, because at least then you'll find out what happens at the end, as opposed to if you go with someone else's conviction, often subconsciously, I think you just kind of ruin it. My experience.
No, I think that's true.
Great. Okay. Talk about CEO role. You said over communicate, share the vision, strategy way more than you think is necessary.
Yeah. And I think just practically speaking, I internalize things a lot, and before kind of the big, mission, strategic change and direction or whatever, like I've been thinking about it for a long time and doing a lot of deep work and like talking to, advisors and investors and like people externally to like understand, should we make this pivot or should we do this? And then, at all hands, I get up and I talk for, 30 minutes or whatever and say, all right, here's what we're going to do. And then I walk away and confused why it didn't just click and isn't as solid in everyone's brain as it is in mine. And so I just found like need to just at least spend as much time.
Broken record, absolutely.
Yeah. To where you feel like this, and also if you're growing, like new people are coming in and they haven't heard all that work. So you have to do it until everybody's sick of you saying that.
Yes. Be honest with yourself when things aren't going well. React violently.
Yeah, that's kind of similar to the carry big stick, I guess. But like, as most entrepreneurs are optimists, you have to be to start something. And I found that like I get stuck in that optimism, looking at the numbers, and it's like, well, we're down this, but this is because of seasonality or because like this thing. And, it's really easy to explain away why things aren't working well and explain like how, well, we've got this deal that might happen, or it's almost certainly going to happen next quarter, and then like things will change. And so I say that just for me, like knowing where my tendency is, like I have to like, viscerally like fight that and react, obviously I mean react violently in a metaphorical way.
That's great. And so related to that, you said if you have to cut just once and cut at least twice more than your first instinct. And this is referring specifically when you say cut, it's like cutting staff. Is that
cutting staff or budgets, and 2x is maybe not precise there, but I found like probably one of the bigger mistakes I made. Like I haven't had to make layoffs often, thankfully, but the first time I did, I made excuses for why like, oh, we can't let this person go, and we can't let this person go, and so like it was pretty watered down in reality, and like pretty quickly, and it's like, no, things we're fighting for survival here, and I should have I should have cut deeper in terms of budget.
And a big piece of that is to make other people feel safe that there aren't more cuts coming, right? Because
exactly.
If it's rolling once a month or something like that, then essentially you lose all productivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, growth is everything. It affects team, capital, partnerships, customers, everything.
Yeah, and I know there's a danger to just focusing on growth in startups, but you have to be honest with yourself that like it is a lever on all those things. You're going to get hire the best people. You're going to get the best investors and the best partnerships when things are growing. And so like, yes, you don't want to be evil in your obsession over growth, but like you have to understand like that's just the reality of business. Like you have to be growing, especially in a startup environment.
Yes. Hundreds of small steps taken quickly, a few big steps contemplated deeply, also taken quickly.
Yeah. And I think just, especially in the context of like when things aren't working, you have to move quicker than you're probably comfortable with, or at least like I start from the comfort level, and take a lot of steps to try to fix that.
Great. All right. So now we're getting into the personal lessons. And so we got a couple personal lessons, and I love these just because I think we often forget to ask these questions when we're talking to people who have been successful in business in particular, especially as they're still operating. So first you said, have strong relationships outside of work. This will support you.
Yeah.
Who are those relationships? Yeah, good.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say all these, these are probably the lessons that are hardest for me to remember each new venture, because it's easy to kind of get focused on, be reactionary to the business and not focus on these things. So for me, strong relationships, my family, my wife, my kids, and, my closest friends, and like, you can't, you have to keep investing in those relationships, because I think, and all these things, these are good for you personally, but I also think like truly, in tackling all these things, that will make you a better entrepreneur. Okay.
Can we circle on this one? Because I've actually had this conversation a couple of times recently. I've met a lot of young founders who are saying like, look, I don't have time to invest in a lot of these different relationships right now. I need to focus on my business. Or, I mean, have you seen the movie La La Land?
Yeah.
So, right, I feel like not spoiler alert, but essentially you have these two kind of career-oriented individuals who decide
Right.
to break it off, not because there's a problem in the relationship, but
Yeah.
because they think they need to be fully dedicated to their career. And this is a
Yeah.
myth that I'm seeing kind of played out in kind of Gen Z over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Speaking.
Yeah, I mean, and look, there are people who have certainly been successful without having those strong relationships. I can just talk for myself. So I've been married almost 20 years. So we got married as I was starting my first, we met in college and got married like right out of college. And so like she's been with me through all this, and that job that I talked about quitting, I quit that to start Formstack. 2 weeks before my firstborn was born. So like, most of that was, coded and built with like, a newborn on my lap. And so like, and gone through like, crazy like scale experiences with, a young family and married. And so like, I've done it. And like, I could just say, like, it's made me better as a person, which has made me, a better entrepreneur. And, maybe I'm not able to put in as many hours as like somebody without, but I just know, and I think for the most part, like what I've observed is like those people probably burn out quicker. And I don't know that they're as effective. It's not universal, but like, I think at least if it was me, I would not be as effective in the time that I was spending in the business, on the business, if I didn't have those relationships.
Great. Find a hobby completely unrelated to work. This will balance you.
Yeah. And I think that's, kind of similar. Like even if that's just reading, or watching movies,
Play
or,
poker,
something.
right?
Yeah. I play poker. Yeah. And to be fair, like poker completely went by the wayside, and that's a huge time investment, right? So maybe it's like picking the hobbies that like, the ones that you can spend like a couple hours, on the weekends or, an hour or two at night, versus ones that, at least for me, it was like, full day tournaments, right? So that's hard to do when you're scaling a business. But, I think having something other than just the business, like really kind of helps you mentally.
Take care of your mind and body. Meditate, eat well, exercise. This will enhance you.
Yeah, and this is certainly the one that like I've had the biggest trouble, neglecting. And so this is for me to try to learn from this and practice what I preach, not follow my past examples. But yeah, I just know like when I'm in better shape, when I'm eating well, when I'm really taking care of myself, like that, again, to the previous points, like it helps me be a better entrepreneur.
Yes. That's a better motivation for me than aesthetics personally. Like I don't care that much about if I look good, but if I can be more clear, I'm like, that works. And so those are my motivations for different diets.
Exactly. I think, I've certainly seen it myself. Like when I am, when I work out and I meditate, like I think better throughout the day. And like that, it's just like reinforcing to myself, like I need to take that hour, like that hour I spend, working out and meditating or whatever, like is going to pay off. Like I just know the math works. So like it's better to invest in that than to, just stumble out of bed and start working.
Yes. Push yourself to keep learning new things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, especially in this type of profession, like as an entrepreneur, as a founder, like or CEO, you can't let yourself get complacent, and you have to even if that's through the hobby, like learn how to whatever, play chess or do something. You have to kind of like those things will help you in other ways of business if you just keep learning new things, even if you can't tell how it's going to apply directly to business today.
And last, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, and I think that theme is probably through a lot of these bullet points where you have to think about this over a longer time horizon than especially personally, working a lot of hours is not sustainable for most people, like actually for anyone. And like, there's a lot of science behind like your efficacy over time during the day, and without enough sleep, without the right food and all. And so you have to think about like how do I operate at peak performance every single day? Not, how do I just, grind and burn the midnight oil? And like, you have to look at the science, look at what, the work that, NBA players or NFL players are putting into, diet and sleep and like all these things, to operate at peak performance, as well as like, I think most of the entrepreneurs we admire really are doing a lot of things behind the scenes that you don't see to optimize the time they spend on work and to optimize for a long career, right? For a 20-year career, not just for how can I grind as hard as I can for 2 years and then flip this thing.
And there are some benefits for certain public-facing CEOs to appear as though they're sprinting all the time.
Right, exactly. Right? I mean, that's
we don't have to believe that. Okay, that's what your life always looks like. Like there used to be a show. It was called A Day in the Life, and like they would follow different CEOs, a day in the life. And I remember watching Branson's, and it was like he flew to like 3 different countries. I'm like, you don't do that every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, most public company CEOs, like they watch TV at night just like we do, and they hang out with their family and do things that but it doesn't sell as well, right?
Yes. It's not good television.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's great, man. Hey, we did it. We knocked it out. This
awesome.
Impressive. Thank you so much for putting this together, and thank you so much for sharing this. I feel like it's such an incredible service to entrepreneurs to share these things that you've kind of learned over time. So thank you for putting this together.
Happy to talk through this, and appreciate you having me.
Could you give me a 2-minute blurb real quick on what you're doing now and how people can reach out to you?
Yeah, so what I'm doing now, I'm a venture partner at Starting Line, which is a seed fund focused on consumer investments, and also doing some angel investing, also on the board of Formstack, one of the companies I started. And you can find me on Twitter at Ade Olonoh, or on my website at adeolonoh.com.
Great. Awesome. Dude, thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah, great talking to you.
All right.
Hey, I hope you liked that video. If so, maybe watch another right here. Why not? Also, make sure to hit subscribe down below. Thanks for watching.